It was just another ordinary day at the bustling diner, a place where the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. The waitstaff moved quickly between tables, chatting with regulars, and making sure orders were taken without a hitch. Among them was Jessica, a young waitress who had been working there for a few months. She was known for her quick wit, sharp tongue, and sometimes a little too much sarcasm. But on this particular day, something unexpected was about to unfold. It began with the arrival of a man who looked somewhat out of place, older, heavier, and dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans. He quietly slid into a booth by the window, scanning the menu as if he was a stranger to the establishment. Jessica, without skipping a beat, approached his table, her usual playful smirk already in place. "Hey there," she said, leaning over slightly as she placed the menu down. "What can I get you, big guy? I hope you're not planning on eating everything on the menu." It wasn't uncommon for Jessica to joke with the customers, but this time, her words hit harder than she realized. The man looked up at her with a calm expression, giving her only a slight nod. He didn't seem offended, but something about him made her feel uneasy. But as always, she shrugged it off. It was just a joke, right? As the minutes passed, Jessica couldn't help but glance back at the man. He wasn't rushing through his meal like the others. He seemed to take his time, savoring each bite, which only fueled her amusement. She whispered to her coworker behind the counter, rolling her eyes, "Can you believe this guy? He's probably going to need a whole other seat for dessert." But little did Jessica know, her careless words were about to catch up with her in a way she could never have predicted. The moment came when she returned to the man's table to check on him. With a false cheerfulness, she leaned in and said, "Everything going okay over here? I hope you're not planning to ask for a second helping. You already look like you've had enough for the whole table." But before the man could respond, Jessica's manager, Carla, suddenly appeared at her side. She looked tense, like something was off. "Jessica," Carla said, her voice low but stern, "can you step into the back office for a second?" Confused, Jessica followed Carla through the kitchen and into the small office behind the counter. She felt a knot form in her stomach. What was going on? Was she in trouble? The manager shut the door behind her, and then it happened. "Do you know who that man is?" Carla asked, her tone more serious than usual. Jessica shook her head, a little startled by the change in atmosphere. "Just some regular customer, I guess." Carla paused, her eyes narrowing. "That's not just any customer. That's Mr. Thompson, the owner of this restaurant." Jessica's heart sank. Her mind raced as the reality of the situation hit her. The man she had made fun of, the one she thought was an easy target, was the very person who signed her paycheck every week. Before she could respond, Carla's voice became even more forceful. "You need to go apologize to him, right now. He's waiting for you." Suddenly, the bright, confident energy that had filled the diner earlier felt far away, replaced by a heavy silence. The thought of confronting Mr. Thompson, someone she had so carelessly mocked just minutes ago, felt like an impossible task. Her stomach twisted with embarrassment as she tried to figure out what to say. She hesitated, standing frozen for a moment before making her way back to the dining area. Her palms were sweating, her thoughts scrambled, and her heart was racing as she walked toward the booth where Mr. Thompson was sitting. But when she arrived, the situation was not as simple as she expected. The man wasn't looking at her. In fact, he didn't seem to even notice her at first. He was sitting back in his seat, his hands folded neatly on the table, his face unreadable. As Jessica approached, she could feel her face flush with anxiety. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice shaky, I just wanted to apologize. I didn't mean to offend you earlier. I was just joking around, and I know I crossed a line." She waited for him to acknowledge her, but the seconds stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. He still didn't speak, and his expression remained blank. Jessica felt like a fool standing there, waiting for a response that didn't come. She was about to say something else when he finally looked up at her, his eyes cold and sharp. "You think this is funny, don't you?" he asked, his tone flat. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. No, I wasn't laughing, Mr. Thompson interrupted her, his voice steady and deliberate. "And I'm not the one who should be apologizing here." Jessica froze. What did he mean by that? It seemed like an endless moment before he continued. "You see," he said, his lips curling slightly into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "there's something you don't know about me. But I think it's time you learned." His words sent a chill down Jessica's spine. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. What was he about to say? And what did he mean by this mysterious something she didn't know about him? The answer was just out of reach, and Jessica could feel her heart pounding as she waited. Every part of her body screamed for clarity, but in that moment, the diner felt suffocating, like she was trapped in a world of her own making. Stay tuned, because what happened next would change everything for Jessica, and she would soon learn that some people aren't who they seem to be. Jessica stood there, her breath caught in her throat, as Mr. Thompson's gaze remained fixed on her. The awkward silence between them felt like an eternity, and all she could do was wait, heart pounding in her chest, praying that he would break the tension somehow. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his hands still neatly folded on the table, his eyes unblinking. For a moment, Jessica thought she might just walk away, but she knew she couldn't. The reality of the situation was sinking in. She had insulted the owner of the restaurant, the man who signed her paychecks. And now she was standing in front of him, hoping that a simple apology would undo her mistake. But nothing about this felt simple anymore. "I'm sure you have some questions, Jessica," Mr. Thompson said after a long pause, his voice surprisingly calm. "Like why I'm sitting here, quietly eating, instead of storming out the door, demanding you be fired on the spot. You're probably wondering why I didn't make a scene." Jessica opened her mouth, but no words came out. All she could do was nod, her mind racing to understand what was going on. Why wasn't he angry? Why wasn't he showing any sign of being offended? She had mocked him, after all. Had he taken it in stride, or was there something else at play? Mr. Thompson took a deep breath before continuing. "You see, Jessica, I've been in this business for a long time. I've seen all kinds of people come and go, and I've learned not to take things too personally. But there's a line that's been crossed here, something deeper than just a joke. Something I think you need to understand." Jessica swallowed hard. "I get it. I shouldn't have said that. I was out of line." Her voice was barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure how else to express her regret, but she hoped the sincerity of her apology was enough. But instead of accepting her words, Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "It's not just about your words, Jessica. It's about how you treat people. It's about assumptions you make based on appearance. And it's about thinking that you can get away with hurting someone because they don't fit your idea of what's acceptable." Jessica's heart sank. She hadn't expected this. She thought he would just brush it off, maybe even laugh it off. But now, the weight of what she had said was hitting her harder than ever. She had made assumptions about this man, and those assumptions had led her to mock him, to treat him like a joke. And now he was making her face the consequences. "I know what you're thinking," Mr. Thompson continued, his voice still calm, but with an edge of something more intense beneath it. "You're thinking that I'm just some guy who can't take a joke. But what if I told you that this guy is actually the one who owns this place? What if I told you that my weight doesn't define me? That my appearance doesn't give you the right to make fun of me or anyone else in this restaurant? Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. She knew he was right, but hearing it out loud made her feel even worse. She had been too quick to judge, too eager to make a joke at someone's expense. She had done it without thinking about the impact of her words. But now, as Mr. Thompson's eyes bore into hers, she was beginning to realize just how deeply her actions had affected him. He continued, his tone shifting slightly, as if he was sharing something personal. I used to be like you, Jessica, judging people based on what they look like, thinking that size or appearance meant something about their character or worth. But then I learned that life isn't as simple as that. There's a lot more beneath the surface, and it took me years to get to a place where I could look at myself in the mirror and be okay with who I am. But people like you, people who make these kinds of jokes, make it harder for others to do the same. Jessica felt the weight of his words settle on her chest like a stone. She opened her mouth, ready to apologize again, but Mr. Thompson raised a hand, silencing her. No, Jessica, he said, his voice soft but firm. You don't need to apologize to me. Not yet. I want you to think about something. Think about why you said what you did. Think
about how many times you've made a joke at someone's expense, whether it's about their weight, their clothes, or anything else. How many times have you done it without a second thought? And how many times have you realized that you've hurt someone in the process? Jessica's mind flashed to the countless times she had made jokes about people, whether it was a quick remark about someone's appearance or a sarcastic comment meant to get a laugh from her friends. She had never stopped to think about the impact of her words. But now, standing in front of Mr. Thompson, it was all becoming clear. She had been part of a culture that normalized mockery, that turned people's pain into a punchline. The silence stretched between them again, and Jessica could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her. She was starting to understand what Mr. Thompson was trying to teach her, but there was still something else lingering in the air, something she hadn't yet addressed. What's going to happen to me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't want to ask it, but the question was there, unavoidable. She had mocked the owner of the restaurant. Was she going to lose her job over it? Mr. Thompson smiled faintly, but it wasn't a kind smile. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? You see, Jessica, what I do next isn't just about you. It's about everyone in this restaurant, everyone who works here, everyone who comes in here for a meal. The question I need to ask myself is whether I want to be the kind of boss who lets this behavior slide, or the kind of boss who teaches lessons in kindness and respect. Jessica's stomach churned. She could feel the uncertainty in the air, and it was clear that her fate was hanging by a thread. But as Mr. Thompson looked at her, she realized that what he was really offering wasn't just a lesson in professionalism. It was a lesson in empathy, and she wasn't sure yet whether she was ready to learn it. Jessica felt her chest tighten as Mr. Thompson's words lingered in the air. Every second felt like it stretched longer, the weight of his gaze on her almost unbearable. She wasn't sure what kind of decision he was going to make, but she had the sinking feeling that whatever it was, her future here was hanging by a thread. She had expected him to lay down the law, to fire her on the spot or demand an apology in front of everyone. What she hadn't anticipated was this: him giving her the chance to reflect, to make a choice that could define the rest of her career. But with every word, the stakes kept rising. She realized that what she had done wasn't just a small slip-up. It was a moment that revealed something far deeper about her own character. Mr. Thompson's voice broke through her thoughts again. I'm not going to fire you, Jessica, but you're not walking away from this unscathed either. You've got a choice. You can stay here, work your shift, and keep pretending that this is just another day. Or you can learn something today, something that might actually change the way you see the world. Jessica's mind spun as he spoke. The possibility of keeping her job felt like a relief, but the deeper implication of his words struck her hard. This wasn't just about her job. It was about her growth as a person. It was about facing the impact of her actions and deciding whether she was going to continue being the person who made cheap jokes or the person who took responsibility. She took a deep breath, swallowing her nerves. "What do you mean by learning something?" she asked, unsure of what he was getting at. Mr. Thompson leaned back in his booth, his expression softening just a bit. "I'm going to give you a chance to make this right, starting with something small but important. I want you to take a moment to talk to some of the regulars in this diner. Get to know them. And while you're doing that, I want you to really listen. I want you to understand what it feels like to be on the other side of a joke. Can you do that?" Jessica blinked, unsure if she was hearing him right. She had expected a lecture or a punishment, but this was something different. It wasn't about making her feel bad, it was about giving her a chance to grow. "I'll do it," she said without thinking, the words coming out before she could second-guess herself. "I'll do whatever it takes." Mr. Thompson nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Good. You'll start small, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And by the end of your shift, I want you to come back to me with what you've learned." The rest of the shift went by in a blur. Jessica moved from table to table, unsure at first how to approach the regulars she had once casually mocked. But as the hours passed, she started listening more closely. She heard stories of struggle, of people battling insecurities, of the challenges they faced just to get through each day. It wasn't the superficial banter she was used to. These were real, human stories that connected her to the people she had once viewed as just customers. She saw, for the first time, how her words could hurt and how much more there was to each person than what she'd assumed. By the time her shift was over, Jessica was exhausted but deeply moved. She had learned more in those few hours than she had in months. She wasn't the same person who had made that careless joke to Mr. Thompson, and when she returned to his booth, she wasn't sure what to expect. But she felt a strange sense of peace within herself. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice steady, "I get it now. I've been so caught up in making people laugh that I didn't stop to think about how my words could hurt. Today, I listened to the people here, really listened, and I learned more about who they are, and about myself too." He looked at her for a long moment before nodding. "You did the right thing, Jessica, and that's what matters. I'm proud of you for taking that step." Jessica felt a rush of relief. Her job was safe, but more importantly, she had gained something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of herself and the impact of her actions. She didn't know where this newfound perspective would take her, but she knew it would be a better place than where she had been. As she walked out of the diner later that night, the city lights twinkling around her, Jessica couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in just one day. It wasn't just about a mistake or a lesson. It was about the journey toward becoming a better person, one that didn't rely on hurtful humor to fit in. She had learned that the value of empathy was far greater than the short-term satisfaction of a joke. The diner doors swung open as she stepped outside, and for the first time in a long while, Jessica felt like she was moving forward towards something that mattered. And as for Mr. Thompson, he had given her more than just a second chance. He had given her the tools to truly change, and in the end, that was the most valuable lesson of all.